And welcome to everyone. On behalf of the Committee on Ethnicity, Migration, and Rights, I'm Kay Chalamet. I'm chair of the committee, professor of music and African American Studies. We are enormously grateful to Jorge Ramos for joining us for this lecture. And I think it's important to note that this event was initiated by our students. We are thrilled that it has come together with the support of so many organizations from across campus. And let me please credit our co-sponsors. They include the Instituto Cervantes, the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, the Nieman Foundation for Journalism, and the Harvard Latino Student Alliance. A very special thank you to our program administrators and students who collaborated on the details for this event: Tessa Lewinsky-Desmond, Sophie Jampel, Victoria Whitney, Stephanie Friedhoff, and Erica Carlson. Thank you all. We're going to begin with a video that introduces our speaker, and it was originally prepared for the Emmys, so I think we're lucky to view it. We'll then have our lecture, and it will be followed by a Q&A. If you would like to ask a question, there are microphones at the top of each aisle, so after the lecture concludes, you can form a line, and then our speaker will recognize you and briefly answer some questions, and Mr. Ramos will call on you. We will conclude at 5:45 for what we hope will be a festive reception outside together. And with that, let's start the video. And welcome to Harvard. We are so happy to have you with us.
Jorge Ramos is one of the most admired and trusted television journalists in the United States. That has earned him the sobriquet, the Hispanic Walter Cronkite, although in his Twitter account, it only says immigrant. For his nonstop effort on and off the air to fairly portray the Hispanic community and the undocumented immigrants in the United States, he's been called the voice of the voiceless. According to a recent Pew Hispanic Center poll, he's been ranked the second most recognized Latino leader in the country today. Tongue-in-cheek, no doubt, Forbes magazine recently published that Ramos carries near biblical authority, at least in the eyes of his nearly 2 million nightly viewers. The Wall Street Journal reported that Ramos is a key to a huge voting bloc. Jorge Ramos has been the co-anchor of Noticiero Univisión since 1986. At 28, he was one of the youngest journalists in the country to hold such a position in a national newscast in any language. In fact, looking back on his career, there are only a few historic events in the latter half of the 20th century and the early 21st century for which Ramos has not been present.
¿Usted ha matado a alguien? Pues de esas cosas no habla un...
He's covered 5 wars, endless political conventions, and a good share of natural disasters. He drove all the way from Miami to New York immediately after September 11th. Once, he asked for a vacation to cover the war in Afghanistan.
Where is Osama?
Osama comes there.
An assignment that, at the time, the network deemed too dangerous. Also, he was one of the first reporters to enter Iraq at the beginning of the war in 2003.
Lo que estamos viendo en estos momentos es la tan necesitada ayuda humanitaria. Encontramos a muchos jóvenes.
His thoughts and experiences about those trips and many others are included in his 11 books. In Dying to Cross, he writes about the worst immigrant tragedy in American history. 19 people died suffocated in a trailer truck in Texas. In A Country for All, he argues for immigration reform and equal treatment for millions of undocumented immigrants. But the most personal of his books is The Gift of Time, letters from a father written to his son Nicholas and his daughter Paola. He's been instrumental in promoting literacy among Latinos. In 2002, he created the first book club in the history of Hispanic television. This led the way for his commitment to improve education among Hispanics. He's been involved with many organizations that provide scholarships to immigrant and Hispanic students attending college. He's a relentless interviewer, to say the least. Many newsmakers end up on the hot seat in Ramos's Sunday morning political show, Al Punto. Translation? To the point. And that's exactly what is done with every American president since Ronald Reagan. He's been at the White House interviewing George Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and most recently, Barack Obama.
Le dijo, hermano Fidel.
He's had very public encounters with Venezuela's Hugo Chavez, with former Cuban dictator Fidel Castro, and with Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega. The president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, stood up after only 6 minutes of questioning by Ramos.
Tenemos 6 minutos 40 de entrevista.
Esta es la ceniza.
Jorge Ramos left Mexico when he was 24 after a censorship incident at the television station where he was working. Nevertheless, he's followed Mexican and Latin American politics as if they were local news. During the last 3 decades, no Latin American leader with political baggage has escaped his reach, either on the air or in print. He writes a weekly column distributed to more than 40 newspapers in English and Spanish by the New York Times Syndicate. He's received 8 Emmy Awards for excellence in journalism, the prestigious Maria Moore's Cabot Award from Columbia University, and most recently the RTNDA's John F. Hogan Distinguished Service Award. But more importantly, after so many decades in the business, Jorge Ramos is still a newsman at heart. If people don't believe in what you say, he repeats frequently, it makes no sense to be a journalist.
Hasta mañana. Gracias. Well, I guess I can go now, right? Well, first of all, thanks so much for inviting me here, because when I was growing up, it would have been impossible to think of Harvard. It was simply beyond the realm of all my possibilities. And to be here, it's truly an honor. First of all, I want you to see me and take a hard look, because you're looking at a dinosaur. You're looking at a dinosaur. Think of this. What I'm asking every night to do to millions of people is something that makes no sense. We are asking them to look at me and to look at Maria Elena Salinas and other anchors, and to stop doing everything at 6:30 every night, to watch the news for half an hour to find out what's going on, and then to go on with the rest of their lives. It really doesn't make any sense. Not anymore. Not when you have millions and millions of people getting their news on cell phones, and when the internet is giving us the information that we need, and when Twitter is simply doing the job that I can't do. Right now, at this point, I can't be in Kiev. I can't be in Crimea. I can't be in Caracas. I can't be in Mexico City. This is the only place where I can be, and news so far as I know right now, it's not happening here, unless President Barack Obama says something important in just a few moments ago. So I can't compete with that. I can't compete with Twitter, up to a point in which governments can compete with Twitter. And I wanted to start this conversation today with you talking about Venezuela, because Venezuela right now has almost complete censorship. And while we are talking, there are thousands of students just like you, fighting for freedom, students being killed in Venezuela. And we can discuss the political nuances and repercussions of what's going on in Venezuela. But while people are concentrated on Ukraine, in Venezuela, there's also a huge, important revolution going on, a rebellion going on, with no television, with no radio, with no newspapers being able to report about that. And the students just using their cell phones and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram to report what's going on, up to a point in which President Nicolás Maduro called Twitter máquinas imbéciles, which the translation would be stupid machines. And he's so upset about that because despite the censorship and despite the repression, and despite that so far at least 18 people have died in Venezuela, despite everything, because of Twitter and because of Facebook and because of internet, we know what's going on in Venezuela. In this school, Leopoldo López, the opposition leader, came to study a few years ago. But Leopoldo López right now, he's in prison. He's in prison in Caracas. And he'll know that today we are talking about him because of Twitter. Because one of you, or some of you, and I'll be one of them too, I'll make sure that in Venezuela, that they know that we are talking about Leopoldo Lopez and the opposition and the students right here at Harvard. And that's such a powerful, powerful message that it is impossible simply to avoid. That's why Nicolás Maduro calls it máquinas imbéciles. That happened in Iran, happened in Tunisia, happened in Ukraine during the Arab Spring, that turned into the Arab winter probably, and now it's happening in Venezuela. So that's how I wanted to start this conversation, talking about Venezuela because it's so important. But really I was invited here to talk about us, to talk about the Latino community in this country. And I was reading a new book on Cesar Chavez, and in 1984, Cesar Chavez said the following phrase. He said, we've seen the future, and the future is ours. 1984, Cesar Chavez. He was giving a speech in Los Angeles. He was not particularly, his speeches were not fantastic, but the content, the message was incredible. So back then he said, again, we've seen the future and the future is ours. Cesar Chavez was not a brujo. He couldn't predict the future, but he was into something. He knew something was going on. No? He knew that his fight was with the campesinos, that he could change things. And I think what he was really talking about was the Latino wave. This huge Latino wave that is truly a demographic revolution, a cultural revolution, a social revolution that is changing everything in this country. At the same time, 1984, I got my first job in the United States. I had left Mexico 1 year before because of censorship. I was working for a television network. It was my second report on the air. And I thought it was a good idea, in just about time, to talk about the dictatorship in Mexico, the one-party dictatorship in Mexico. There has been, at that point, about 6 decades of the same party. And I thought it was a good idea to talk about that and to criticize the president and to say something bad about the president. Well, that was my idea. But my boss and the owner of the television network, they thought otherwise. So they censored me completely. They didn't run the report. And before they fired me, because they were going to fire me, I handed my resignation. And I left. And that's probably one of the most important things that I've done in my professional life. I decided one of the most powerful words in any language is no, N-O, no. And I said, no, I'm not going to accept the fact that you want to censor it. I don't want to be a censored journalist. I want to be a free journalist. I want to be able to say whatever I want, and then I want to be able to criticize those who are in power. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But I decided to leave, and then after I handed my resignation, I said, wow, yeah, now what am I going to do? So I had a Beetle. I don't know if that's, it was a really old Volkswagen. I got $2,000 for it. I had saved all my life, but then that's the only thing I had. And I sold the car. I got $2,000. I applied to lots of colleges in the United States. No one accepted me. But UCLA Extension accepted me. So I decided to study 1 year, a 1-year course on journalism and television. And there I went to Los Angeles. And I remember exactly when I arrived, because as an immigrant, you remember that moment when you arrived. Precisely, I know exactly at what time it was at ALAX. I was able to carry everything I owned with my 2 hands. Can you imagine that? Everything that I owned, I could carry with my 2 hands. And that was a sense of freedom, an incredible sense of freedom. But I was very poor, I had no job. It was gonna be so incredibly difficult. But I was finally doing exactly what I wanted. And as an immigrant, when you remember that first time when you arrived, it's like having your first baby. You are so excited, but you have no idea what to do with it, no? Well, that's exactly what, as it happens as an immigrant. So I went to UCLA, I got my certificate with a student visa. I ended up getting a job at Univision at the local station in Los Angeles, but I wanted more. I wanted just to make sure if I was able to work in this country. So I went to talk to a news director in Los Angeles, and I asked him if he could give me a job. And he said, he was very direct, and he told me, you know, you will never work in this country. I said, but why? What are you saying? Well, he said, first of all, your accent in English is really thick. I can't understand it. He was right. I couldn't even understand myself. And nowadays, it's even difficult. And then he said, and then if you want to work in Spanish, forget about it, because all Latinos, all Mexicans in this city are going to assimilate, and very soon, all Spanish language networks and television stations are going to disappear from this country. The assimilation is going to be so fast. It's going to happen with Mexicans and with Latin Americans, the same thing that is going to happen that has happened with Italians and Germans and the Irish population before. They're going to assimilate, and then they're going to be part of this country, and forget it. Don't even think of reporting in Spanish in this country. Well, he lost his job, and I got mine. Because that was this incredible Latino revolution going on that he was not aware of, and that Cesar Chavez were aware of. And I sort of knew that something important was going on, because they hired me to work in the local station, the Spanish language local station. The Latino wave was truly incredible. 1984, when Cesar Chavez said the future is ours, there were only 15 million Latinos in this country. Now, there are 55 million Latinos. And then in 35 years, there's going to be 150 million Latinos. 150 million Latinos. That means a third of the population in this country, 1 in 3, is going to be Latinos. We are changing everything. Texas is going to go from red to purple to blue, and probably to white by the surprise of people saying, what's going on in this country? You know? And we are changing absolutely everything. The other day, I was invited to go with Jon Stewart to the Daily Show, and we were talking about all these changes. So he asked me, so how do you explain this change? And I told him, well, the secret is very simple. We Latinos, we love making babies. And because of it's not politically correct for other people to say things like that. I can say it because I'm a Latino. So just imagine another one saying that because of the birth rate, we are growing. Well, that's the truth. We have more babies than the average in this country. So that explains why the majority of the growth right now in the United States has to do with a lot of Latino babies. Go to it's really a fantastic experiment. If you have a chance and you're in California, go to any school or any hospital in Los Angeles, and it's Jose, Pedro, Maria, Alejandra. I mean, and that's the truth. But recently something changed. The professors here in Harvard, I'm sure they'll be able to pinpoint exactly when it happened. But for many decades, the majority of the growth was coming from immigrants. We were getting about from 1 to 2 million immigrants every single year, legally and illegally, every single year. And the reason is very simple. If you are in Guatemala or in Mexico and Ecuador, and you are making $5 a day, that's more or less the average daily salary that some of the workers are getting, $5 a day. And then you talk to your cousin or to your girlfriend or to your parents, and they tell you that you can make exactly the same amount of money in half an hour. What are you going to do? Especially if you have no jobs and no possibilities, or someone is sick, or you just want to be Cesar Chavez, or you just want to go with your parents. What are you going to do? So immigration is not really that complicated. It's simply an economic problem. It's supply and demand. If there's people in Latin America looking for a job, and jobs for them in this country, they're going to keep on coming. And believe me, though, they're going to cross any river, they're going to cross any border, and they're going to cross any wall. It doesn't matter how tall it is. And by the way, it really makes no sense to have. They're spending billions and billions of dollars on walls. I've been a lot of times to the border, and they're huge walls. And by the way, the only comparison that I can make, I went to Israel and the Palestinian territories, and and the walls between Bethlehem and Israel, or Jericho and Israeli territories, they are just as strong and as big as the ones that we have here in the United States and Mexico. But the difference is that it doesn't matter how tall the walls are at the border, 40% of all immigrants, they come by plane. So it doesn't matter how tall they are, they're going to keep on coming here, and they will overstay their business. So this is the world that I found when I got here to this country. And since then, I've been able to be a free journalist, to ask any questions. I think, of course, we have many roles in society as journalists, and to inform, to put in perspective, to make sure that there's a connection between peoples, that we can tell the audience, our readers, people watching, what's important. But I think the most important role for us as journalists, the most important social role for us as journalists, is to confront those who are in power, to make sure that they don't abuse their powers. Maybe that's the way I was raised in Mexico, in which that was not a possibility, but I think that's exactly what we have to do as journalists, to confront those who are in power. So before we go on, for the last 4 or 5 months, I have a new job. As an immigrant, as you know, we have many jobs, and I have 5 jobs. One of those jobs is to work for Fusion. It's a new partnership between ABC News and Univision. And despite my thick accent, they hired me to do a 1-hour daily show. And what's been really interesting is that for 30 years, I've been doing this, and nobody really paid attention to what we were doing. And now that we are broadcasting in English, everyone is responding immediately. And I think finally we have the chance to do in English the same thing that we have been doing in Spanish for 30 years. So I brought like 2 minutes of some of the interviews that I've done in the last 3 or 4 months. And after that, I'll tell you a little bit more. Go ahead. So this is with President Barack Obama. This is very important. I don't want it to get lost in translation.
Right.
You promised that.
Sí.
And a promise is a promise. And with all due respect, but you didn't keep that promise.
Well, here's what I would say, Jorge.
MSNBC accused you of plagiarism on Monday. They accused you of stealing 4 lines from Wikipedia for your speech at Liberty University. So is this true? Yeah. I mean, they're saying that you borrow lines from a Wikipedia entry about the movie Gattaca. So what happened?
Yeah, we did, and I let people know.
I didn't say I was holier than thou. I said I tried. I didn't deny that I did anything.
That you inhaled. Yeah.
I never denied that I used marijuana. I told the truth. I thought it was funny.
Really appreciate that.
Well, I mean, because as you know, he had promised 2 important things, to close Guantanamo and to present immigration reform. Those are 2 very important issues, and he just didn't, do it, and you were there.
No, but I appreciate that you want to, how you want to just, let me say something like this. Yeah. I know you'd like to, maybe it's convenient to try to find who do you want to blame.
You were born in Calgary, in Canada. So can you run for president? The Constitution says you can't.
Right. Well, I was born in Calgary. My father's Cuban. My mother's American. My mother was a U.S. citizen by birth, and so under U.S. law, I was an American citizen by birth.
You're a monster. You're dividing families. You're arresting people just because of the color of their skin.
I only have a chance to talk to the groups.
Nice. So that means that in about 35 years, there's going to be 150 million Latinos. That's a third of the population, and everything's changing because of that. More tortillas being sold in this country than hamburger buns.
I feel like you're doing my material back at me.
No. Well, so that's what we've been doing in the last 2 or 3 months, and I think that's exactly what we have to do, to be more transparent as journalists, just to ask the top questions. Sometimes I feel that, thank God I'm not in Washington, D.C. or New York, and sometimes at the networks you get the sense that the interviewer and the interviewee, that they're so close and they're such good friends that they simply don't want to ask the top questions. So there were like 2 decades before somebody asked Bill Clinton if he did inhale. Of course he did, no? And then Ted Cruz, he wants to be president. That's fantastic, but he was born in Canada. So in other words, there are a lot of questions that we have to ask, and we're not asking those questions. With President Barack Obama, I find it's difficult because he is for immigration reform. And you know that I've been fighting for immigration reform for such a long time. But he promised us that he was going to do something the first year, and then the first year passed, and nothing really happened. So I'll tell you a little bit more about President Barack Obama and the Republicans. But first, let me just finish about this demographic revolution, this Latino wave that we were talking. When I was telling Jon Stewart about these changes, it's not only, it is true the way Latinos we're changing this country is amazing. Not only, of course, more tortillas are being sold than bagels and hamburger buns. That's a fact, and more salsa than ketchup. The color in our faces is amazing. We're bringing color to this country. Look at our color is different. The crossover pioneers, remember Gloria Estefan and Ricky Martin and Jennifer Lopez. Now we have Christina Aguilera and Shakira and Bruno Mars. You know that obviously Bruno Mars was playing during the Super Bowl. His name is Peter Hernandez, not Bruno Mars. Peter Hernandez, and his dad is from Puerto Rico. So some of the most watched television stations in the United States are in Spanish. Last summer, the #1 television station, regardless of language, was Univision. So maybe something happened during that summer. Maybe it was too hot. Maybe people were not watching TV. But the #1 television station in this country, regardless of language, was Univision. And then accents are accepted from Sofia Vergara to The First Bachelor. Of course, that's incredibly important. And when you walk in cities like Phoenix and Los Angeles, just a few decades ago, to put it in perspective, there were signs in those cities that said, no dogs or Mexicans allowed. Only a few decades ago. And now, in those same stores, there are signs that say, English spoken here. So it's just imagine the change. Go to Miami, to Calle 8, 8th Street, and try to speak English. I mean, it'll be difficult for you to find someone who speaks English over there. So we are definitely changing the way we live in this country. And now, for those who are really concerned, it's not a reconquest. The Mexicans and Mexican Americans, we don't want to take back the territories that we lost in the war in 1848. We don't want to do that. But to tell you the truth, it is not a reconquest, but it is not full assimilation. It is very difficult to be Giorgio or Gianni in the 1900s in New York and then trying to send a letter to your girlfriend in Naples, and that it would have taken months for the ship to go back and forth to find out if she was going out with someone else or if she was ever coming back. Then being Jose and Maria living in Los Angeles with cell phones, with email, with Twitter, and being in connection constantly with what's going on in Mexico and trying to get in touch with your family in Tijuana, and then every single day listening to me or to listening to a guy in the radio station in Los Angeles called El Piolín. So that's a completely different world that we are living in. And as Latinos, again, it's not the reconquest, but it's not full assimilation, because in contrast with other waves of immigrants in this country, we are maintaining certain elements, certain characteristics from our country of origin. Language, almost 90% of all Latinos speak Spanish to some degree. And certain values like the importance of the family and certain traditional values, especially when it comes to religion and abortion. And then something unique to us, and that's this secret desire that we'll be back someday. And that's why we as I'm 55. It took me 25 years to become a US citizen. I love this country because this country gave me the opportunities that my country of origin couldn't give me. But it took me 25 years to become a US citizen for many reasons. One of them had to do with the fact that I was always having this secret desire that someday I was going to go back. Not because of Mexico, because I was looking for home. I never had a home here. And then now I realize I've had like 25 homes in this country. When in Mexico, my mom lives in the same place she's been living for the last 30 years. And before that, she had lived in the same house for 50 years. So in other words, it's a completely different place where we live in this country. And sometimes I feel that I'm still looking for that home. And when George W. Bush was elected president, I thought that I needed to vote. I wanted to be part of this country. I realized that something needed to be done. And then came 9/11. And at that point, I knew, and I had once a conversation with Isabel Allende, the Chilean writer, and she told me exactly the same thing. After 9/11, we knew this was our country. And we knew, because before 9/11, when you were talking to some immigrants, we felt the need of having to choose between, for her, Chile and the United States, and for me, between Mexico and the United States. And at that point, I finally realized that I didn't have to choose, that I could be from two countries, that I can have two passports, and I have two passports. And I use it, if I want to get into Venezuela with my American passport, I would never get in. But with the Mexican passport, I can. With the Mexican passport, I can go to Cuba, but I can use my American passport. In other words, there are places where it doesn't matter that. What's important is that I finally realized that I'm from two countries, and I wanted to be this country. I realized that this country was going to be my home. And then, now that I know that this is my home, I want to be a fully participant of this democracy. And now we can talk a little bit about politics. As I was talking to a group of students just a few minutes ago, we are a lot of people, somos muchos, but that's not enough. We have to go from numbers to power. We have to make sure that we can transform those numbers, those billions of tortillas, that 55 million, that's 150 million in just a few years, that we can transform that into power. And we started doing that in the year 2000. A few Cuban-American votes in Florida, with the help of the Supreme Court, helped George W. Bush to become president of the United States. And then George W. Bush was the first US president who thought that he was speaking Spanish. And you can say whatever you want about W, but he got it. He understood that he needed the Hispanic vote to win the election, and in 2004, he got 44% of the Hispanic vote. He made tons of grammatical mistakes in Spanish, but he tried to speak Spanish, and he won 44% of the Hispanic vote. President Barack Obama in 2008, he got 67% of the Hispanic vote, and he got elected. He got reelected with 71%. And look what happened with Republicans. Unless they can get a third of the Hispanic vote, they're going to keep on losing. George W. Bush got 44% of the Hispanic vote, and he won. But then came John McCain, 31%. He lost. And then Mitt Romney, 27%. Incredible with Mitt Romney. He wanted the Hispanic vote, right? And then he said, I'm for self-deportation. So he's saying, he's saying to you, I want your vote, but please go home. No? It's impossible. It isn't going to happen. So they don't get it. So as journalists, we always make a mistake when we make predictions, so I'm going to make a prediction. So the prediction is this. If Republicans can't deal with immigration reform, and if they keep on blocking immigration reform, they're going to lose the White House in 2016. It's that simple. They don't get it. John Boehner and the Republicans in the House, they think that they can play politics instead of dealing with this issue. And they simply don't get it. We'll remember that. There are going to be 16 million Latinos voting in 2016. And they're going to lose the White House again and again and again. Because they think that they can forget about this issue or play politics, but we won't forget it because it's personal. What they don't understand, what John Boehner doesn't understand, and what Republicans don't understand is that this is personal for us. If you see the polls, and your professors can tell you that, poll after poll shows that the most important issues for Latino are like for the rest of the country. jobs, the economy, education, healthcare. It's normal. However, when it comes to immigration, it's personal for a very simple reason. 1 out of every 2 Latinos in this country above 18 years of age, 1 out of 2 is an immigrant, is a foreigner, just like me. So if you are John Boehner and you are saying, you know, I don't want to give you, forget about the citizenship. I don't want to give you the right to live in this country despite the fact of all your contributions. What you are saying is, I don't want you here. And I don't want that person, but at the same time, John Boehner is telling me, and Republicans are telling me, I don't want you in this country. Even though it's your country, I don't want you in this country. And there's no way in the world that they can do anything with the Hispanic vote unless they put aside immigration reform. And having said that, I also have to talk about President Barack Obama. As I was telling you, on May of 2008 in Denver, Colorado, he told me in an interview that he was going to promote immigration reform. He was going to present a bill during his first year in office. And he didn't do it. He didn't do it. So he broke a promise. And as a reporter and as a journalist, we have to confront President Barack Obama on that. And not only he hasn't done it, and nowadays, of course, he's for immigration reform, but 4 years later, when he had, and that's why when I talked with Rahm Emanuel, I asked him, you were at the White House, you were the chief of staff, why you decided, that was a conscious decision, they decided not to move on immigration reform in 2009. Of course, we were having tons of economic problems, but they were responsible. And they didn't do anything when they controlled both the House and the Senate. And now it's almost impossible because Republicans, they don't want to cooperate. So President Barack Obama finally is for immigration reform 4 years later, but he has deported almost 2 million immigrants in this country. 2 million immigrants. So he's saying, it's a contradictory message. He's saying, you know, I want you here, but I'm deporting your father, and I'm deporting your mother, and I'm deporting your friends. So that's very difficult to understand something like that. Just to finalize, I think that the numbers are very important, but we have to transform that into political power. I think at the end, Cesar Chavez was right. The future is ours. And if you realize that the future for Cesar Chavez is our present right now. It's exactly where we are right now. That future that Cesar Chavez was talking about is right here, 2014. And the future, in a way, is ours. In a very close elections, Latinos can decide who's going to be the next president or presidenta of the United States. And let me just finish with a personal note. As an immigrant, it sounds corny and it's a stereotype, but I've been able to live the American dream. But now I realize that there are 2 types of American dreams, 2 categories. Both of them are fantastic. One is when you have a job and certain respect and a little money to retire and the freedom to say whatever you want as a journalist and to be able to do whatever you want with your life. That's my American dream. And then there's the American Dream Plus, or any way you want to put it. It's a different category. And that's when your kids can do better than you. When you realize that you have all that, and then someone else behind you is doing better than you. So when I first arrived in the United States, it was impossible to think of Harvard. As I told you, you are the chosen ones. Maybe you don't realize it, but you are the chosen ones. You are the ones who are going to be able to change the world. And the next step for us as a community is to have the first president or the first presidenta hispana in this country. There are more Latinos. It's very simple. There are more Latinos than African Americans. African Americans already have their first president. I think now it's our turn. It's that simple. And finally, my American dream is the American Dream Plus, because I never even thought of coming to Harvard. And I couldn't come to Harvard, but my daughter did. So that's the American Dream Plus. And so thank you so much. It's been a long speech. So all your questions, go ahead. Yeah, or you just want to say it like that. Yeah. Oh, all right. Okay. All right.
Hi, my name is Francisco. I'm a graduate student here at Harvard. I wanted to thank you, I think, for coming here. I think all of us, I'm sure, have grown up with you on television, and I'm sure all of our parents
are.
Oh. Yeah, but I think for me, I just growing up just seeing you on TV, and I'm sure my parents are. This is the first person who's like are excited to hear about. But I wanted to talk about, I think, education. So I think you did do a segment with Professor Fernando Reimers, and I think you keep talking about the future of Mexicans and the Latinos and Hispanics. But I think, where do you see Latinos in the future? I think as far as education, I think currently, like you look at Wall Street and it's mostly white people. You mostly, and I know there's this whole room right here is mostly Latinos, but I hear at Harvard we're small group. So I think as a group that we're going to take, it's going to be a huge group here in the United States. Where do you see, I think, your responsibility as a journalism to bring part of this up, education? Yeah,
I know that. You can correct me, but about the percentage of Latinos at Harvard is about 12%. Yeah, we're 17% of the population, so you're not really that far away. I think if you talk to me in 20 years, and you come to me and say, because I had a meeting with some Latino students, and they were complaining that the university is not giving them the institutional support, if I remember correctly, that was the quote, the institutional support that they need to thrive here. But what I was telling them, that might be true, but that's something that you have to fight among yourselves. But if you come to me 20 years from now and you tell me that you couldn't succeed because an institution didn't give you the institutional support to succeed, I think you wasted your life. I think what I was telling them is that you are the ones who have the responsibility to change what's wrong now. Not only in Boston or in this school, but in this country, you have as I was telling you, we have to go from numbers to power, and you have that possibility. I think obviously the only way probably to do it is through education. We had a huge dropout rate. We still do within the Hispanic community. That's very important. And of course, we have all the wrong examples. If you think of the millionaires nowadays, they sing and they play baseball and they start up companies in San Francisco. And then we think that's the best way to go, but as a community, we can do that. I can't tell everyone, be a baseball player or sing like Gloria Estefan or Ricky Martin. That's not the way to do it. I think only through education as a community, we can do better. And all of you, or most of you, are in such an incredible and privileged position to change that. And I'm certainly hoping that, and I'm not just saying that, I'm hoping that the next president of the United States is here right now. I think it is possible. And something changed when Obama was elected in 2008. Before that, I was traveling around the country and meeting a lot of kids in school, and I was always asking, who's going to be the next president of the United States? And there were just a few kids who would raise their hands, kind of shy. Now, it has changed completely. When I go to schools, lots of Latino students are raising their hands, because if President Barack Obama did it, and he borrowed a phrase from Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez, sí se puede, I think we can do it. But it's only through education. I think so.
Ok, mi nombre es Andrea Olivo, soy de Venezuela. A propósito de estar hablando de Venezuela, a mí me gustaría saber tu opinión. ¿Por qué el gobierno de Estados Unidos no ha intervenido ante la crisis que estamos viviendo ahora?
She's asking me, she's from Venezuela, and she's asking me why the U.S. government hasn't intervened in what's going on right now in Venezuela. I think the first answer is that the U.S. should not intervene militarily in any country. We can't do that. No, that's not the way to do it. I don't think that's the experience that we've had and you know the history. We can't go back to where we were in Guatemala or in Nicaragua or in Chile. That's not the way to do it. There are many ways in which diplomacy and sanctions could work. And I'm really not only saddened but upset that countries in Latin America are not responding to what's going on in Venezuela right now. Because we might not agree on if President Nicolás Maduro was elected fairly or not, if there was fraud or not. Because I think he was not, but it's just my opinion. Many Chavistas think that Maduro was elected legitimately, and I think we can agree that there are differences of opinion. Having said that, we can't accept when a president orders the National Guard to kill students, or when the president allows the National Guard to kill students. And that's when the rest of the countries in Latin America and the United States, that's when they have to respond. I'm surprised to listen to Secretary Kerry being so straightforward with Ukraine and with President Putin. And when they are considering the possibility of putting sanctions, withdrawing visas for Russians, and when thinking of many possibilities, and not talking the same way about Venezuela. But that's a way to pressure the Venezuelan government. But I would never at all would support the idea of any kind of military intervention from the United States. That's simply wrong. That's not 2014. That's something that we can't accept. No?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Jorge. Mi nombre es Andres Cubilete. I'm a graduate student from Assumption College out of Worcester. And I just want to say you're a great example to any community, not just the Hispanic community. But I have to share a little bit about my family story. We came from the Dominican Republic in '93. Mm-hmm. And I was the only kid at Assumption, but I didn't see myself. I think the resources were there. You know, in many classes, I was the only Hispanic kid. But we thrived, and we did well. And I want to say, how did your perception change when you wrote the book, Dying Across? How did you see immigration differently?
Just imagine risking everything just to be in this country. While covering the border and seeing how many, right now, today, on average, 2 people died at the border. Today, just today, trying to cross. Because the problems that they're facing in their country of origin and the draw to come to this country is so incredibly strong that they're going to keep on trying. And right now, of course, we have 11 million people who are in this country who have no papers, but they're contributing so much to the economy and to the culture and to the politics of this country that many people just don't get that. But I think we have to understand that we're also responsible for, when they come to this country, they're not coming just because they want to come to this country. They're coming to this country because there are thousands and thousands of companies who are hiring them to come to this country, and millions of Americans, including all of you, and including me, who benefit from their work. So we are partly responsible for this new wave of immigrants coming to this country. And unless we recognize that, nothing's going to change.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. My name is Jorge Ramos. I'm a third-year law student here. And first of all, es un honor. Es un honor. I grew up watching you, as I had a chance to meet you earlier. Mm-hmm. My mom, my grandma, I've been texting them. They think I photoshopped it. They don't not believe me, right? So thank you very much. But I do have a couple of questions. One, you mentioned how we have a lot of very prominent Latinos right now, and mm-hmm. I feel blessed since I came here. I had a chance to meet a few of them. We have the Castro brothers, we have Cruz, mm-hmm. Rubio, Villaraigosa, he was here earlier in the semester. I'm curious to hear your opinion on who you think is in the best position to really take charge, and you mentioned going to the highest office. I'd be curious to hear your opinion mm-hmm. on who you think is the best place to do that. One. Question two, you mentioned that here we have a lot of potential. I'd be curious to hear, I know several of folks here are interested in politics. I'd be very curious to hear your advice on somebody who is not in the position quite yet, but maybe in a few years will be running for office. It'd be great to hear your opinion on that.
Let me just start with that. Just do it. I mean, if you have a dream and you want to get involved in politics, right now is the best time. There's a lot of Latino voters who would be supporting you. The problem is that we are 55 million and only 16 million are going to go to vote in 2016. And people are saying, well, Latinos are not really interested. No, it's very simple. We're so young. We're on average 27 years of age. Many of us are either not registered or they are not citizens yet. So that's a problem. But just imagine when all those millions of Latinos become citizens. It's an incredible force. So when you run for government, it's going to be perfect. Just choose the right place to do it. But it's going to be, it's just perfect. Now, for the first time in history, we're going to have many Hispanic candidates running for the presidency. It doesn't matter what's really interesting is that despite the fact that most Latinos vote for the Democratic Party, about 70%, and that they're going to keep on doing that unless Republicans change course in the next 2 years, and I don't think they're going to do it. What's really interesting is that we have more possible presidential candidates on the Republican side than on the Democratic side, because who's going to fight against Hillary Clinton? I mean, Antonio Berragosa, he's not going to try to do that. And the Castro brothers in San Antonio, both of them are great, one in Congress, one as the mayor of San Antonio, but they're not going to fight with Hillary Clinton, so they just might wait for 2020. But on the Republican side, we have Senator Marco Rubio, who's now suddenly, yeah, you might not like him, but despite his politics, now he's getting involved a lot with Ukraine right now, for instance, and they're doing something on Venezuela. We have Ted Cruz, our Canadian senator, but he truly, you know, when I spoke with him, it's something interesting with Senator Cruz. Just an anecdote. I've been, of course, working in Spanish for 30 years, and I was never able to interview him, and I never understood why. The truth is, Senator Cruz, he feels much more comfortable in English than in Spanish, and he just didn't want to speak Spanish with me. When I started working for Fusion, he has given me 3 interviews. So in other words, I thought it was personal, but it was simply the fact that he didn't feel comfortable in Spanish. Senator Cruz, he thinks that he's American and that he can be a U.S. president. So we have Marco Rubio, we have Ted Cruz, we have Susana Martinez, the governor of New Mexico. So just imagine a few years, the first Hispanic candidate was Bill Richardson. His mom is from Mexico. And he was the first Hispanic candidate. Now we might have 3. And then on the Republican side, I think today's, I think yesterday there was an election in Texas. And have you heard of George P. Bush? Yeah, he wants to be the next president of the United States too. So yeah, but Jeff Bush, he might be running too. Obviously, he's not Latino, but his Spanish is flawless. He's very good. He understands the Hispanic community. He's married to a Mexican. And George P. Bush, he's Latino because his mom is Mexican. So we have 4 possible Republicans, Latino Republicans, who might be able to run. So this is changing from having no Hispanic bachelor. Now we have a Hispanic bachelor. And you know, that might sound stupid, but it makes a lot of sense. What we are saying, what we are seeing right now is that everything's changing. What was not normal, now is normal. Now we see Sofia and we think, oh, well, she's not funny. Or we can say, she's doing great. Whatever you think about her, the important thing is that she is there. And we are there for the first time, almost everywhere. No?
Mm-hmm. Yes, my name is Jose Sanchez, and I'm from Texas, and I'm at the Kennedy School. My first question is, well, my only question is, out of all the interviews you've done throughout the years and very important people you've met, which interview had the biggest impact on you, and why?
Los más malos son los mejores. Yeah, I mean, when you're doing an interview, you want to talk to someone who's strong. Oriana Fallaci, the late Italian journalist, she was at the end very controversial because of her stance on the Muslim community. But as a journalist, she was fantastic. Once covering the Persian War in Iraq, we were covering the war, and we were in the same hotel lobby, and she was such an important figure for me that I didn't have the courage to go and say, you know, I want to thank you because of you, I'm a journalist. Oriana Fallaci wrote a wonderful book called Interview with History. And for her, the idea of an interview was, for her, that an interview was a war between the interviewer and the interviewee. And it was a war. And sometimes the interviewee would win, sometimes the interviewer. So for me, the best interviews are with those who are really strong. With Fidel Castro, if you ask Fidel Castro about the lack of democracy in Cuba, he's not going to like it. With Hugo Chavez, I had 3 interviews with him, and all of them were fantastic because he hated me. And you know, Hugo Chavez did something. He was an authoritarian figure. He was full of hatred to the political class that was in power before him. And you can understand why Venezuelans were so angry. For 40 years, 2 parties were in control of the country. And they were so corrupt that when they saw Chavez, they found the possibility of change. And Chavez, of course, he abused his power, but as an interviewer, he was just fantastic. Let me tell you what happened with him. Once I went to Caracas because he had promised me that he was going to give me an interview. And the year before, he was elected president, and he lied to me in my face. He said that he would never take control of the mass media in the country. He did. That he would never take over private companies. He did. And that if the people wanted, that he would leave power 2 or 3 years after being the president. And that he would never, ever stay over 5 years. He stayed 13. No? So he lied to me, and he did it with such a beautiful face. And then, you know what he did? For the interview, he brought 2 of his daughters. And then, when President Chavez brings you his daughters, and he introduces you to his daughters, what are you going to do? Are you going to criticize the father? No, think of it. It's so difficult. It was very difficult. I'm not going to say who, but with 2 American presidents, it happened the same thing. Once with George W. Bush, look what happened with when Paola was younger. I was covering the campaign. And then I went to talk with George W. Bush as a candidate. You remember we were in California. Look what he did. He called the photographer for the campaign. And before the interview, he took a picture with Paola. How can I criticize him? How can I do that when he had been such a wonderful, and he was, wasn't he? When he was, yeah, he was. So, and obviously when I did my interview, it was not my best interview. And then with President Obama, I took Nicolas, who's now 15. He was much younger. And he took Nicolas to the Oval Office to take a picture. So it was not my best interview either. So let me just go back to Hugo Chavez. So the second time I talked to Hugo Chavez, don't bring your kids for interviews. It's not. Hugo Chavez, he told me he was going to give me an interview in Caracas. And then he took me, he said, I saw him in Caracas at the airport. He said, you know, I don't have time. Let's go to Guarumito. Guarumito is at the border between Venezuela and Colombia. I went on a military plane. The plane had a malfunction. We had an emergency landing. Anyway, 3 hours later, when I landed in Guarumito, Chavez accepted the interview with me. It's a really small town. He went to a basketball court. He put 2 chairs in the middle of the basketball court, We were surrounded by Chavistas, hundreds of them. And every time I asked a question, I was booed. And every time he answered a question, he was applauded. So he won that interview. Yeah.
Home court advantage.
Yeah. You have another? I'll be shorter on my answers because.
Hi, my name is Jose Robles. I'm a student here at the college. I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about your new role at Fusion. Kind of what topics have you been able to cover that maybe you weren't able to cover before at Univision? And also, what kind of coverage and impact do you hope to have on the 2016 election?
It's great when you don't need translation, because for 30 years I've been doing the same thing and nobody paid attention. No, I did an interview with Bill Gates a year ago. Nobody knew about that. And then I did the same interview with Bill Gates on Fusion, which is in English. It's a partnership between ABC News and Univision, and it got a lot of tracking. So it's like we are players now in the same language. English is the language of power in this country. And we have to understand that. If you want to succeed in this country, the only way to do it now, it's in English. And with Fusion, I'm finally able to do that, even with an accent, but I'm able to do that. You know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello, Señor Ramos. Thank you for being here.
Señor Ramos.
Sorry, I'm very formal. I was raised in the South. No, my name is Janet Ramirez. I am an undocumented sophomore here at the college. And hearing you speak of privilege and the power that we as people at Harvard have to be political and change, I was wondering what you think it will take for immigration reform to pass. Do you think it just takes time, or is it a change in popular public opinion or a social movement spearheaded by the people that it most affects? What do you think it will take? Do you think it can be done? It's
not time. I mean, don't think that if we wait, it's going to happen. That's what my grandma thought. No, just wait. Things are going to change. It never happens that way. I think my heroes, my real heroes right now are the dreamers, because they have been able to change the political conversation in this country. Remember that just a few months ago, that they were in this country undocumented. They had no possibility. And they changed the way they were protesting against the government. They decided to walk all the way from Miami to Washington. They went to every member of Congress's office, to the Senate, until they changed things. And they did the unthinkable. For many years, President Barack Obama was saying that he didn't have the executive authority to change anything. And then he authorized DACA. Deferred action for undocumented students. So I think Republicans have to know that they'll pay a huge price for not approving immigration reform, for blocking immigration reform. John Boehner has to know that. And that when they lose 2016, they might realize that. And then with President Barack Obama, I think we have to put more pressure, because he's saying that he can't stop deportations. And he can. Not all of the deportations, but he can stop deportations. If he was able to stop the deportations of the dreamers, he can stop the deportations of their parents and their friends and their colleagues. So the only way to change things is to be in your face, to show them that we are important and that we won't move. That's the only way to do it.
Thank you.
So in other words, go to Boehner's office. No? Yeah, exactly. Go to the White House. Make sure that they see you. No? Because they have to put together this 11 million documented immigrants category to your face. No?
Hi, I'm Miguel, and I'm from Mexico. And one of my question is regarding the relationship between Mexicans and Mexican Americans here in the U.S. And my question arises because I believe that in Mexico we have like a very cynical view of the role of Mexican Americans here in the U.S. In my opinion, we look at them as a source of revenue because they matter as long as they're sending money to Mexico. But there's not like a relationship, like a constructive relationship for their the interest of these two groups that are separated by the border. And as the Latinos gain more relevance here in the U.S., I think that relationship has to change. So my question to you is like, what do you think are like what's the advice that you could give us to in these two sides of the border? How should we move forward in the way we shape our relationship?
Tension between the U.S. and Mexico. That's think of the war 1848, or think of the NSA spying on President Peña Nieto's cell phone. No, so it's still there. It's a huge border, and there are just a few places in the world where they're still thinking about building walls, and that's one. But what governments can do, I think we as citizens can do, and as students can do. There's a plan for bringing more Mexican students to the U.S. It is incredible that there are more Asian and Chinese students in this country than Mexican students. And despite the resistance, when the European Union started to create, there was a movement here in the United States to do the same thing. If they can put together 20 countries or more and have no borders in between them, why can't we do the same thing between Mexico, Canada, and the United States? But it isn't happening because there is no political will to do that. So I think we as citizens, I think we can do much more when it comes to information, when it comes to education, and even when it comes to the drug on wars. Let me just talk a little bit about that. In the last 7 years, about 80,000 Mexicans have died in Mexico trying to prevent drugs coming to the United States. About 80,000 Mexicans, and they're still dying today. And in the United States right now, there are about 25 million people who are using drugs. And if you go to Colorado and to the state of Washington, you could have a great time. And so Mexicans and Colombians and Central Americans, they're dying trying to prevent drugs coming to this country, while in this country the conversation is beyond that. President Barack Obama 2 weeks ago at the White House, he openly said that he got high. Bill Clinton just told me that, yeah, he did inhale. And so it's not a moral thing anymore. It is simply that the war on drugs is not working, and that people are dying at the border, south of the border, and that it's becoming more and more accepted in this country. And that's an area of cooperation where we really have to change things. We have to change the conversation, and the only way to do it is with citizens changing the conversation, and then politicians will come later. Because if we wait for them to change things, nothing's going to change. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, my name is Yesenia.
Then I'll talk to both of you over there.
Yeah, so again, hi, my name is Yesenia. I am a student of first year at Tufts University. And you sort of touched on my question before, but I wanted to know, I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm a daughter of 2 immigrant Mexican parents. And I was wondering, right now, my parents are just putting everything to my name right now, and the houses, the cars, everything, because there's this fear that they're going to be deported. And I know that you said that, well, my question was, when do you think it will change? And I know that you said that we should wait, but also get in their faces. But what exactly do you mean? Should we, the students, and those who have a formal education, go to the White House, get in their face that way? Or do you mean continue doing more protests and things like that? Because that is happening in Milwaukee. However, I just don't think that's going anywhere right now. Or, you know, I just want to know, what exactly do you mean get in their faces?
The dreamers, look, our politicians have done nothing. Our Hispanic representatives, they've done nothing, absolutely nothing. We have 3 Latino senators. We have 20 Hispanic members of Congress. And they are well-intentioned, but they haven't been able to do anything whatsoever. The only ones who've been able to change things are the dreamers. And their tactic is working because they were able to change things. They were able to get legal status in this country. And as far as I know, that's the only thing that is working, to be in your face with politicians, to let them know that there are going to be consequences for them if they don't change their stand on immigration. it is unfair for President Barack Obama, who now is for immigration reform, to be called deporter-in-chief. Yesterday, there was a conference in La Raza, and Janet Murguia, the president, decided to call him deporter-in-chief because he is. That's exactly what he is. And I think that's the only way they will understand us, that they can't take our vote for granted and that we will protest. And the only way to do it is just to be in their face. I think that's the way it is. I don't think President Barack Obama will stop deportations right now. But if it comes 2015 and 2016 and nothing happens with immigration reform before he leaves, he just might be able to stop the deportations of your parents. And that's the important thing. He's already stopped your deportation or somebody else's deportation, but not the deportation of your parents. And that's the next step.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here.